leaving the willful mentalities and you enter into the willing mentality, that is what leads to virtue, because there's this deep contentment, right? There's this acceptance, and really the natural, particularly for Christians, recognizing God, what flows from contentment is a deep gratitude, right? You can't be grateful if you don't believe in a giver.
Welcome in to Menfolk Journeys, the podcast of great conversations with men. I'm your host, Chris Foster, and we're going to explore how we wear this beautiful and confusing mantle of manhood in the 21st century. Look, I get it. In public life, a lot of men are knuckleheads. But in private life, we can be thoughtful and we can be reflective if we have the right conversation, if we feel comfortable talking about our story. And we all have a great story to tell. And we can all learn from those stories. We can learn about who we've been, who we are, and who we want to be. And that's why we're going to have this conversation, so we can learn from other men just like us. And in this episode, we're going to talk with my new friend Matthew. This is a very deep conversation. I'm just telling you. We go into some really intense subjects about ethics, about morality, about how parents can either be too helicoptery or too permissive, how we build a structure of ethics, how we can build a foundation of virtue, the idea of willingness versus willfulness, and how you manage a life to be a good life. What does it actually mean? You're going to love this conversation. This man is incredible. Welcome in to Menfolk Journeys. Well, all right, Matthew Janzernaw, welcome in.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Really appreciate you being here. Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. So, like I said, my name is, or like you said, I guess my name is Matthew. I'm 26 years old, and I am married with 2 children, 1 son and 1 daughter, and a third on the way, actually. So we're pretty excited about that. Thank you.
When's the due date?
July 10th.
Oh, wow. Very exciting.
Yep. So it's great. And it's funny because we're actually moving right now, which also is relevant. The next thing I wanted to say is I was originally from Michigan, from the Grand Rapids, Lansing area, but currently live in Pittsburgh. And then we're actually moving back to Michigan because, well, you can imagine with 2 kids and another one on the way, we kind of would like to have some family around us.
Absolutely. I totally get that. Now, where in Pittsburgh do you live?
Mount Lebanon.
Sure.
So it's the southwest side of Pittsburgh.
Oh, yeah. Very familiar because I lived in Pittsburgh.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I grew up in Pittsburgh. We moved there when I was 5, and I spent my entire childhood in the Pittsburgh area.
No way. We actually really like Pittsburgh.
Love Pittsburgh. It's awesome. So I lived in about 8 different homes over 10 years. My folks had split, and so then they kind of moved to different places. So we first settled in Squirrel Hill, and then my dad got an apartment in Shadyside, and then he moved up to Gibsonia in the north of the city. And my mom and I and my brother went to Highland Park for a couple of places there, and then finally ended up in Regent Square. And Regent Square is kind of right in between Squirrel Hill and Wilkinsburg, right by Forbes and Braddock, right near Frick Park.
Sure. Yeah, honestly, we wish we could transplant Pittsburgh.
Yeah, or just transplant your parents and move them into Pittsburgh.
Right, one of the two. We also have some other family and some community there too. But yeah, absolutely, we like Pittsburgh a lot. We're sad.
Yeah, it's a great place to grow up, and actually, Pittsburgh has, from what I remember, Matthew, Pittsburgh actually has a pretty robust Catholic community in the city.
Yeah, no, we love our parish.
Yeah, what parish are you in?
It's St. Michael the Archangel Parish, but we go to St. Bernard Church.
Okay,
or St.
very
Bernard's,
good.
I guess, as they would say it.
Yeah. No, so it's an interesting piece because I think that's probably really important to you. From what I understand, your Catholic faith is actually very important to you, not only in your faith, but also in your community.
Yeah, and I even started a business, largely to do with my Catholic faith. I run a Catholic life coaching business. So that's what I do full time. I do some other stuff on the side, but that's mostly what I do.
So with the Catholic life coaching business, a question then, is that
Mm-hmm.
complementary to what someone might find actually within the diocese itself? Is it in terms of, do you offer spiritual guidance, or is it
Mm-hmm.
more connectedness? And I'm sure there must be some kind of overlap, unless it's a reach on
Yeah.
my part.
No, there's definitely an overlap, and I could answer it really simply, but it's also just a funny question because the more that I talk to particularly Catholic counselors, or the more that I talk to, my dad actually did a spiritual mentorship program. So I talked to him about that kind of stuff. And really it's so similar, but also not at all at the same time. There's tons of overlap. So a lot of my clients, we talk about what they're discerning in prayer. Some of my clients, we were dealing with anxiety. So there's tons of overlap. But I would say the main difference between like a Catholic life coach, or at least me, and like a spiritual director is the spiritual director. If you say, I think the Lord is saying this to me in prayer, the spiritual director might question that or dig into that more. As a coach, I kind of assume that it either is the Lord or maybe it's not. But what I then ask is, okay, what can we get from it? Like, what good can we gain from, the word that you got in prayer, or maybe something said out to you in scripture and that's resonating with you. So I'm just trying to kind of get what we can get out of it, because ultimately that's what we're called to do. And what I think is the easiest way to hear the Lord's voice is to kind of assume that it's Him, to some extent, right? But then ask yourself, okay, how can this draw me closer to Christ? How can this benefit me?
So that's an interesting perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So one of my favorite works of art is the Iliad,
Mm-hmm.
by Homer.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's been a bazillion translations, but all the translations begin with the same phrase.
Mm-hmm.
And the phrase is, "Oh, sing muse, sing through me as I tell about the wrath of Achilles." And the idea that Homer had was it wasn't him.
Mm-hmm.
It was the muse. The muse was singing through him,
Mm-hmm.
and the divine was working through him. He was a vessel of that spirit. So I just was interested what you just talked about, because you said, are these people, are the folks that you're talking to reading scripture and feeling the Lord move through them in terms of making decisions? Is that some of the conversation?
Kind of. It's also funny because at the same time, a really common thing. So I have some partnerships with some various Catholic ministries, and I'll coach their missionaries as they're leaving the ministry field, kind of transitioning back to regular life. And a really common thing that I find is this kind of, I don't know if it's super intentional, but this idea that there's God's will and then there's my will, and I should do away with my will in order to follow God's will. But really, the goal is not to do away with our will, but rather to, come home, have our will come home in the Father's will, right? So there's that unity. And the ideal is that, the Holy Spirit is not only speaking through us and speaking to us in an obviously supernatural way of, hey, this thing came to me in prayer or whatever the heck, but also that the goal is that He speaks through our desires, that He speaks through our thoughts in a certain sense, natural way. So I completely agree that there's meant to be this kind of, not really cohabitation, but this co-creating, this collaboration almost with yourself and God. That's the goal, right?
Right.
There's, we have, our heart, the heart is fickle, as it says in scripture. So it's not always the easiest thing, but that's the goal at least.
You mean we're human?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Yeah. But I love that you like the Iliad. I wish that I had read the full thing. Same thing with the Odyssey. I'm vaguely familiar with them, but we've lost so much in our modern culture from the ancients, even Aristotle and Socrates and Plato. And then you have, Homer with the Odyssey and the Iliad and all these things. And we've just lost so much of really the roots of Western culture. And we don't, but we're here right now, it's where we are.
But I think that, it's an interesting thing. There's on some of the episodes that I talk about. So for frequent listeners, please forgive the redundancy, but I've been, since the summertime, reading more the original Stoics. So diving into Marcus Aurelius, a little bit of Seneca, and kind of there's a guy named Ryan Holiday who made him a little bit more accessible. So through him, I was like, okay, this is pretty interesting stuff. And then I went to the OG sources to start reading it. What really surprised me, Matthew, is the commonality of theme that runs through Marcus Aurelius, who was like 2,000 years ago, right? Along with the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu a couple thousand years ago, along with, from what I understand, folks talking about scripture where you start listening and paying attention to what the Lord might be telling you, right? Kind of flowing through. In Marcus Aurelius, he calls it logos. Logos is the ether, it's the spirit, it's the unnameable, right? And he says, if you tap into the logos, you will learn what to do. The logos is telling you what to do. We just aren't listening, right?
Yeah.
For Lao Tzu, it's the Tao, right? He says the Tao is everywhere. It's there. Your life is like a river, right? You're just flowing. And if you listen, the Tao is kind of this vessel that will, show you what's really real. And what I find just fascinating, Matthew, is how these themes run through these different people and different cultures and different times, but they seem to be these immutable concepts that don't move, right? And to your point about Western civilization, it's very hard, I think, for people to grasp these concepts and without going to the original sources.
Yeah.
Right? How do you know about the hero's journey, deeply, if you don't read the OG, right? If you don't read those original texts.
Well, and I think this is also why in the early Western culture, why it was in some sense easier to evangelize from a Christian perspective, because they had that foundation of the hero's journey and these ideas that there are gods and that there is a higher power that's trying to speak to me and through me, right? That was already there, where in modernity, that's not a given anymore, right? Because we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, I think that's that's a great turn of phrase, to throw the baby out with bathwater. Just that concept of we do need to evolve, and we will move along, and there needs to be a progression of ideas. But oftentimes, I think you're right. In the progression of ideas, we jettison or toss out some really important foundational things that should carry through. I mean, look, I'm a huge Harry Potter fan. I love it. It speaks to what happens in Lord of the Rings, which speaks to what happens in the Odyssey. I mean, there are these through lines in Star Wars and the hero's journey. It all kind of carries through, right? But when you start making these things more accessible, which is great, sometimes though we lose the ability to go back to those original foundational pieces, right? I think Harry Potter is a brilliant story. I think that it has a really interesting Christian archetypes from my perspective. I think.
Yeah, I know it's interesting. Well, it's funny because that's controversial in some circles. Harry Potter itself, I mean.
Yeah. So tell me, why do you think it is controversial?
Well, it's controversial because, first of all, depending on which circles you're in, the use of magic, some Christians don't like that because magic is real. And, from their point of view, they don't want to make it sound as if it's this plaything, right? This imaginary thing. Like, it is a real thing. There are witches. It's a real thing. Not a good thing. We shouldn't, entangle ourselves or mess around with that kind of stuff because it can really ensnare you. But that's one thing. The other thing too, that my cousin he made a good point. He doesn't like how it, in a certain sense, teaches that it's good to be disobedient and that the adults don't know what's going on, but the kids do. And it kind of can foster that. So eventually he had to allow his kids to read it though, because he read it growing up and his kids all wanted to read it. So he eventually allowed them to, but he's doing it with them so he can kind of talk them through it.
And that is interesting. I want to go ahead.
I was just going to say, which I think is good for any story, even if it's not controversial. I think
Right.
I think you should be doing that with your kids.
Yeah, you should
Excuse
read
me.
with the kids. The one thing I
Right.
do think though about those books, and this doesn't all have to be about Harry Potter, but what I love about the story of life with that is that when you are a teenager, as a parent of
Mhm.
you haven't gotten there yet. I've been
Not
there,
yet.
done that with teenagers. There is a sense of rebellion that you need them to have
Mhm.
because eventually they've got to move on to their own life, right? And
Mhm.
how do you detach from your parents to become your own adult unless you can kind of push them away and push yourself through
Mhm.
that? You know, and
Yeah.
teenagers throughout history, I mean, you know, Shakespeare didn't write Romeo and Juliet out of a vacuum, right? He saw
Right.
Romeo and Juliet, teenagers gone be
Mhm.
teenagers, right?
Mhm.
And so there's a sense of rebellion about it. And what I love about what your cousin did, though, is
Mhm.
that he recognizes how real it is. That kids
Yeah.
are going to be disobedient, right? So
Right.
let's read it together, gang, and talk about
Right.
it.
Well, and even then, he'd rather them not be disobedient. And since he saw the writing on the wall, he said,
Right.
well, I'd rather do it with them than them perpetually have this desire and their friends talk about it or whatever the heck. And then, you know, put them in a place of rebellion. And that's the thing, too, is I think that rebellion in the modern sense doesn't actually need to happen. I completely agree with you that there needs to be this launching, right?
Right.
But the parents really should be fostering that and cultivating that and guiding them in that, right? And I think this idea of like the actual like rebellion, I don't think that actually needs to happen. I think a lot of parents pit themselves against, put themselves against their kids unintentionally or intentionally sometimes.
I think that's really insightful of you. That's very wise. I think you'll be an excellent parent to teenagers.
I hope so.
but I think what's interesting about what you said is that even the concept of adolescence is a very modern concept,
Mm-hmm.
right? Back in the Wayback Machine, you were 10, 11-year-old boy. It's like, okay, I'm going to pull you up and drop you off into the shoemaker and you're going to be an
Mm-hmm.
apprentice.
Mm-hmm.
There's no adolescence or
Mm-hmm.
rebelliousness, right? I mean, sure, there's as there should be, like the teenager hormones, right, that are going
Mm-hmm.
crazy and they get really excited and passionate about stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's why they
Mm-hmm.
call them the Hotspurs, right? That's fine. But you're right. There doesn't have to be a rebellion to detach.
Mm-hmm.
A parent can say, look, our goal is to not raise great kids. Our goal is to raise great adults, right?
Absolutely.
Stolen,
I love that saying. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, it's a stolen line from Michelle Obama. She says, our job is not to raise great kids, it's to raise great adults.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you've got to teach them failure. You got to teach them ethic. You got to teach
Mm-hmm.
them morality and work and, how to work and how to get through stuff so that
Mm-hmm.
maybe you're right. Maybe they don't rebel. Maybe they're
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, I still need to launch and detach, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
because I'm fighting against you. And
Right.
I think what's so interesting is that, I wonder where this started, especially in the
Mm-hmm.
US. Might be a cliche, but I go back to the 60s, right? I'm like, oh, this rebellious generation. I'm going to fight the man. I'm going to fight you and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then they needed to perpetuate that construct of my kids are
Mm-hmm.
going to have to fight with me during adolescence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think it's also, particularly with the rise of more permissive parenting, along with helicopter parenting, I think those
Mhm.
two things are kind of breeding grounds for rebellion. Because if you're super permissive, then they're not going to have enough structure in order to actually launch. And so they're going to try to, in a certain sense, make structure by rebelling to create tension, right? Because you don't. Sure, you want to be maybe when your kids are older, be friends with them to some extent, but your main job isn't to be their friend, right? Your main job is to be their parent. And so I think that when the idea of permissive parenting, the goal is to be their friend. And if a friend were to tell me what to do, in an authoritative, like, hey, I'm your parent, I'm in charge here, that wouldn't really make me want to be their friend.
Right.
And so then whenever you have permissive parenting, eventually the parent's going to have to lay down the law at some point. And then when that happens, they're setting themselves up for failure because now they've acted like a friend, but now they have to be the parent. And so when they have to be the parent, the kid's like, whoa, wait a minute, that's not right. And then they rebel because they know that the parent doesn't actually want to be the parent, but wants to be their friend.
Yeah. Actually, that's a really, again, very, very insightful, where is the parent's intention, right? If the parent intentionally wants to be friend, it comes across in behavior and speech. Whereas parent says, no, I'm parent, and that's my relationship with my child.
Right. And then if you have helicopter parenting, well, you can imagine there's going to be rebellion, because who wants to be helicoptered, right? No one wants to be smothered like that. I read a book, I can't remember the name of it, but it's something to the effect of raising adults or something like that. And there's this American mom who, I think she moved to like Sweden or something, but there was one day she went to the park, and maybe it's not Sweden, but it's some other country at least, and went to the park, and her kid was playing or whatever. And then after a little bit, she noticed that she was the only parent there, and there were tons of kids there. She was like, what the heck? And so that kind of made her question, like, why is it necessary for me to be here? And I'm not saying one way or the other, right? Different cultures, different, crime rates or whatever the heck, right? But that kind of got her thinking. And then there's even, and again, I don't know if it's Sweden or not, but there's this tradition almost where they would put their 4-year-old sons out in the woods for a day and just kind of let them live and make a fire, do whatever. And the point that she was making is that to whatever extent you remove risk, you also decrease their capacity for autonomy and development.
Right.
And so that's the job of the parent, is to find the right balance and really the right risks. And I think that's something that parents need, that culturally we need to get better at, is instead of saying, no, don't do that, that's not safe, say, hey, that risk isn't worth it. That kind of terminology, because it tells the kid, hey, risk is worth it sometimes, but this risk isn't worth it, right? And helping them to realize which risk, when is it worth it to risk something, and what's worth risking.
Oh, I love that concept. We had an episode about risk. A guy named Brian was talking about cultivating risk and the benefits of risk, especially teaching his kids those risks. And to your thing about the gal in Sweden, I read, it might have been from the same person, but I read an article where she spent, she was in Sweden like in the darkest months, and she went to the library, and she saw some parents there, and they were having their little lunch in the little thing, and the baby's in this little high chair, and the mom just got up and left, and and she's like, is she coming back? What's going on? She was gone for maybe 40 minutes looking at books and came back. The kid was there just eating and no problem, right? To your point about this sense of safety net, this sense of, hey, we're not really worried about this. And not only that, but child needs to know that child can be by themselves without parent, right? Without parent kind of hovering over them, and I think that kind of helicoptering versus permissiveness really gets challenging, and I'm not going to say dangerous, but it gets unhelpful as the children get older, because as they start trying to make decisions about their vocation or their career, more importantly about the people that they want to be, I guess it can be a little bit confusing if your parents are too permissive or too helicoptery, because then the child actually can't flourish as their own selves.
Right. Their self hasn't even fully developed.
Right.
And I think this is also part of the epidemic of people trying to find themselves. I think part of it is because their parents didn't show them who they were and help them to become that in their adolescence.
And it also could be the epidemic of our adolescence and young adulthood getting longer.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, exactly. Not getting married till you're in your 30s, not having kids till then. And then this is another thing too, is that people don't realize is that Jordan Peterson, way back when, he mentioned like the unplanned childlessness epidemic, right? Where we've told particularly women this lie that, yep, go to college, get your career, do all of the things for yourself, and then get married and have kids. And the problem with that is that the older you get, statistically, the likelier it is that you're not going to get pregnant as quickly as you'd expect to or like to. And so then you have these women who want to be moms, and then they're struggling to be moms, right? So if I remember correctly, it's 1 in 3 couples struggle with infertility, and infertility is defined as not being able to have kids for 3 months when trying to have kids.
1 out of 3. That's a pretty high statistic.
Yeah. Now, granted, it includes people who, aren't getting pregnant the first or second try, right? But still, we had this idea like, oh, you get married, or you don't, in modern culture, and then, you have sex and you have kids, and that's how it works. And it's like, well, actually, it's not like a 1-to-1 ratio, it doesn't just simply happen. There's a lot of other things, for the men's health, the women's health, a lot of other things that play into actually being able to have kids.
Yeah, and I think that also in America, we're getting older in terms of when we start families. And to your point about kind of quote unquote knowing ourselves, it stretches to where, some, young men in particular, maybe they go to high school, maybe they don't. Or maybe they go to college and maybe they don't, I should say. And then after college, there's this period of quote unquote struggle of figuring out themselves. And suddenly they're in their mid to late 20s and they just haven't landed.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of like, a sense of definition, right? Who am I if I haven't really landed on my career or I hadn't landed on myself? And one of the things that you had talked about was, how you define yourself, especially as a young man. Do you find yourself as what you do from a career, or to define yourself as how you think and feel? And I think that, we've got an entire generation of young men in America in particular who are really confused about what to think or feel, or who they actually kind of want to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, I'm giving a talk shortly, in the near future on personality and virtue. And one of the things that I'm going to be talking on is in large part, when did modernity start and why are we where we are? And, really, as far as bad things go, it starts with original sin, back with Adam and Eve. But for these purposes, there's in the 1300s, there's this guy named William of Ockham. And he had this idea that eventually became nominalism, which simplistically is there is no nature to anything. What you see is what it is. Okay. So when you see a tree, there's no like treeness to it that can help you figure out what other trees are. It's just that's a tree, and they're very individualistic. Right. So he'd basically tried to simplify things, so to speak, by getting rid of metaphysics and philosophy. And how it affected religion was that he had this idea that it's merely about doing God's will, and God's will is arbitrary. Okay. And so instead of it being kind of imbued in nature, that there is this order to creation, that things have a certain nature of how they operate. And so instead of that, it just merely is the way that it is. And there's nothing else behind it. And so the problem with this is that, right now, we're very behavior focused as a culture. We're very, production and doing oriented. And a lot of people fall into this performative mindset where what it means to be a good person is to do good things. And that's all that there is to it. What the reality is that it's not about being, it's not about how we perform. It's about being transformed. And that's something that we don't see as a culture. And specifically, that God is just this guy in the sky who's just this arbitrary dictator, this rule setter, right? It's all about following the rules. Right. And that was a huge thing for Occam. And so when it comes to the virtues, being virtuous is not about doing the good thing. It's about becoming a certain kind of person where it flows from you, right? It's about getting to the point where you desire what is good. You habitually do what is good, and you see what is good as being good. Right.
Right. Yeah.
It's not about just continence and willpower and just doing whatever the heck it is that you're supposed to be doing. Right. But that is what we define as the goal, as the ideal is, to put away my desires and just do the good thing. And that's really pervaded Christian culture. And we've lost this sense of deep interior transformation where we can actually live the good life because we want to, not just because it's set upon us.
I think that's so, that's such a thoughtful way to talk about intentionality, right? And what the raison d'etre, the reason to be, right? The reason for the activity and for the actions. The Buddhists talk about right thought leads to right intention, leads to right behavior, leads to right action. It begins in the core of why you want to do something. And just like you talked about, and then again, even Marcus Aurelius talks about, why am I doing this? Right? Why, like truly, why am I doing this action? Is it because I want to make more money? Is it because I want my parents to be really proud of me because I got the job that they thought I should get? Because I've always kind of wanted to please my parents. That's kind of why I act in certain ways. Whereas you're talking about, no. There's a thought of how can I desire to be the best person possible, be of the best service towards others, do a work that is not only helpful to the community, but is in line with all of my greatest skills. So that's a different way of, that's more of a human being rather than a human doing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, and specifically, where was I going with that? What was the last thing that we said before you said the human being, not human doing?
Well, I think the idea that is the reason why you act. I mean, because one of the things that happens, especially with men, and this I'm guilty of it as much as anybody, right? Where you identify with a career or vocation, or you posture, or you compete, right, with other people. You're a manager. Well, I'm a senior manager, right? I've got a promotion, so I've got a title, and I'm a senior manager, and you're a manager. Yeah, well, I'm a director. Oh, yeah, well, I'm a vice president. Well, I'm a CM, right? You have these titles that create this hierarchy within a business structure. Yeah, I get it, because there's organizational decisions to be made by certain people, but you also know too that there's a posture behind that, right? There's a competition for these things. And oftentimes, especially young men trying to move in through life, they define themselves by those career titles, by those career achievements.
Yeah. And we have this idea that we can do whatever we want and be happy. And it goes back to what we were saying about the divine speaking through us and there being this deeper integration. Because there is a structure to reality, right? There is objective reality and an objective good. And when we align ourselves with that, that's when we can find happiness. But we have this idea right now that I can do whatever I want and be happy. But I promise you're not going to scroll on your phone every day and be happy. That's just not going to happen, right? That's
really TikTok won't make me happy.
No, it won't, right? And I speak I'm not preaching, I'm speaking, right? Because like for Advent, right, particularly in the Catholic Church, the purple seasons are the penitential seasons. So you have Lent and Advent, right? Which is, we kind of lose the idea of penance in the modern world. We like comfort a lot.
So tell me out with that. So the penitential, you said, was Advent and
Lent.
Those are areas, I guess, and help me out with this because I'm not Catholic, but I'm interested in it, is that these are times when me as a person reflect on penance and atonement for actions or behaviors that I've done. Is that close?
To some extent. I would what I would say more to that is, put it this way. If we sometimes Christmas, for example, little kids, right? And even adults, right? Sometimes we can get so caught up in the gifts that we receive that we can very quickly forget who gave them to us and the gratitude we owe to that person, right? So because of original sin, because we live in a fallen world, we can get distracted and caught up with the goods of this world because they're good, right? It's not because it's bad, but because it's good, we can get distracted by that. And so the penitential seasons are when we are seasons when we're, in a certain sense, meant to purify or just put away these good things so that we can more clearly see he who gave them to us. right? So we can see the author of creation, God himself, right? So this is where fasting comes in, or this is where, a lot of people know, like for Lent, you give something up, right? The reason for that is not because creation is bad, but because it is good, right? It's meant to be the sacrifice of love and a similar with a spouse or a kid or a friend, right? If your kid has a basketball game, but you want to do something else, it's not because you don't do the other thing because it's bad, right? You don't do it because it's good, and you'd rather, in a certain sense, sacrifice it out of love for your kid or your spouse or your friend, right?
Right.
So that is the proper approach to the penitential seasons. And we've lost that so much, right? We have this idea that like temperance, right? Which really temporare, going to the Latin, St. Thomas Aquinas, he says that it's more closely associated with the word harmony, right? To be in right order internally, so that your body and soul can speak with one voice, right? But what we've come to is this idea that temperance is simply moderation or self-restraint or restriction or denial. And what that turns into is a fear of exuberance, right? Where it's all about denying the flesh. And what creeps in is the idea that the flesh is bad, that creation is bad. And that is simply not a Christian idea, right?
Correct. I mean, we are made of flesh, right? We are created of flesh.
And God became man, right? So he wouldn't do that if it was bad.
Right.
And furthermore, in Genesis, right, what did God say? It is good. And then he created humans and he said it is very good, right?
Right.
He didn't say, it's good in this way, or it's good in this way, right? Obviously, things are meant to be used in certain ways and done in certain ways, but fundamentally, creation is good. Fundamentally, human beings are good.
We'll be right back. Fundamentally, human beings are good. I completely agree with that. I think that the pessimism of today's world, I think, is sorely misplaced. We are, if human beings weren't naturally good, weren't naturally tolerant, weren't naturally cooperative, we'd be gone, right? We wouldn't still be here, right? We would not have been able to nurture communities.
Yeah.
It's very easy for us to fall into the traps of being overcritical, or I think being of over, and I don't want this to land wrong, Matthew, but over dramatic about the bad things in the world, because clearly things in the world aren't going to be great all the time, right?
Yeah, and in many ways, I mean, I think most people would say that they're not great right now.
Right,
and whichever side of the aisle you go on, both sides are like, this is the worst.
Right. And it isn't right. It is funny because the a buddy of mine, he was on our show, wonderful man, John. And his episode was about the art of devotion. So he comes from a deep Catholic background, and that's a big part of his life. And we were talking one day, we were sitting after our run having coffee, yik yak, and he goes, "Oh, things are so terrible. The world is terrible, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "John, did you go on Facebook this morning or something? You got to burr up your ass. What's going on?" And I said, "John, honestly, if Facebook was around during the 1500s, you'd think the world was on fire, right? We've got plagues, we've got, devastation, we've got cultural genocide, we've got slavery, we've got the Pope having kids. I mean, it's a disaster, right? You'd think that it was crazy. And so the world has always been, right? It has always been. And so I think that now, without these foundational pieces for us to hold on to, it's really easy for us to get lost and distracted, like you said, and I also liked what you talked about with temporare. Thank you. The Aquinas vision of what temperance actually means, and that uniting body and soul, because I think that we also lose the meanings of words and what they and what they actually are intended for. So I've been reading the Stoics, and a lot of people say, "Oh, you're so stoic about stuff, you don't feel it." It's like, No, that's not it at all.
Is that what
right?
they said? So I don't know. I've read a little bit, but it was, when I was taking dual enrollment courses in high school. But tell me a little bit more about the Stoics. Because when I hear the Stoics, it's to a certain extent, their ideas to master oneself is to totally subdue the emotions.
And that's not the case,
Okay.
right? So the whole idea of Stoicism, though, is a recognition of what is.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole concept is, how do I think about how I think? How do I think about how I feel about things? And there is one thing that I can control, and that is my own mind. I can't control the seasons. I can't control what other people do. I can control how I respond or react and engage with what other people do. I can control that, right? If someone is a loudmouth or they're a bore, or if they're nasty or mean, does that really mean that does that change me? Really? Does it change me, or don't I change me? Right? Can't I be in control of myself? And to your point about temperance is a big part of it. The idea of temperance and justice, morality, and the idea of desiring to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, desiring to channel the logos, because it's bigger and broader than we are. And you know what? 200 years from now, we won't be here. 200 years ago, we weren't here, but we're here now, right? And with the experience that I have as human is not going to be that much different in the theme of it than the experience someone had 200 years ago, 2,000 years ago, right? 200 years from now.
Yeah.
And so there are these commonalities, like I said, these immutable laws about humanity that we can tap into. And part of the Stoic ideas, the Stoic philosophy is, well, get in touch with your own. Figure that out for yourself, right? No one's going to figure it out for you. So everything that you talked about with what Aquinas said, with this harmony of the spirit and the body, it's another way of phrasing there's a harmony between yourself and the logos, with yourself and God, with yourself and the muse, right? With that forces that are around you. How do you engage with that? Because if we do believe that inherently the world is good,
which not everyone does,
which not everybody does, which to me is, I don't know, Matthew, I think that's sad, to be honest with you.
Well, it turns into a coping mentality where life sucks. I might as well have a beer while it sucks. Right. And what does that lead to? So Aristotle, I think it was him. I don't think it was Socrates or Plato, but I think it was Aristotle. He kind of devised this ranking, so to speak, of people who were less human and people who are more human. Okay. So on the bottom, he had the brutish, right? These men and women, but we'll say men, are even worse than the animals, because at least the animals operate out of instinct. Whereas
survival.
Whereas the brutish man isn't even operating out of that. It's just purely self-indulgence, purely maniacal, zero reason, right? And this is kind of, I don't know many brutish men, so I don't know if this really exists, but you can kind of see what I'm talking about.
I get you. And also too, it's interesting, and I want you to keep going, but I want to touch on that brutishness. Yes, typically it's going to be men. Women can be brutish in a different way, psychological way, emotionally harm way. Men, though, throughout history have been physically brutish, just have. We are the only species in the world that commits violence towards others that is out of aggression, not out of survival, right? If I'm a tiger and I'm being violent, it's because I want to eat or I'm protecting my young, right? That's what I'm doing. But we're the only war-making type creature out there. I think maybe they say chimpanzees do it too, but not too many, right? It's few and far between creatures on Earth.
Well, and that's even to do with the dominance hierarchy, right? Which is even in lobsters, right?
Right.
It goes back as age as old as time, right? So there is this hierarchy, but the kind of what you're getting at, right, is also the next step, which is the vicious man, right? So the vicious man is the man who desires what is bad, habitually does what is bad, and sees what is bad as good. Right. So he's aimed towards the bad in all of his being. Right. And then the next step is the incontinent man. Okay. So doesn't have a ton of willpower or strength in that regard because he desires what is bad. He habitually does what is bad, but he sees what is bad and what is good is good. Okay. So there's a lot of regret in the incontinent man.
The incontinent man can actually see the scales and say,
Yeah.
I'm actually on the wrong side of this, but I'd
Right.
like to be on the right side. Maybe I'd like to be on the right side, but at least I know there's a right side.
Right. But the danger with incontinency is that when you keep losing that battle, really hard not to fall into despair and say, you know what, I'm just going to do the bad and just actually go in that direction because it's easier.
Yeah. You know,
Right.
and that's where you get to that nihilist approach and that's what turns into someone who actually starts not caring. And then, as we know through even, it's the young men who do the school shootings. That's where because you wonder, say, why does that happen? Where does it lead? I think you got it though. You nailed it. That sense of nihilism to viciousness just slides down.
What's the point?
Yeah,
exactly.
What's the point?
So then after incontinence is the continent man. So the continent man also desires what is bad. His desires haven't yet been transformed, but he habitually does what is good. And he also sees what is good as good. Okay. So the similarity between the continent man and the incontinent man is that they're both at war with themselves. It's just that one of them tends to lose and the other one wins, but it still means you're not really an integrated, virtuous person, right? You're still not living the good life because you're still only doing the good purely based on you know it to be good and you have enough willpower to make it happen. Okay. And then the next step would be the virtuous man. So the virtuous man is the man whose desires have been transformed by reality, in the Christian sense, transformed by divine grace. And so you desire the good. The virtuous man desires the good. He habitually does what is good and he sees the good as good, right? That is what it means to live the good life. And you're fully in that direction. What's interesting is that Aristotle, so he saw the parallels, right? There's continent, incontinent, virtuous, and vicious. So because he saw the brutish, he said, well, then there must be something akin to maybe super virtue. And he couldn't really grapple with what that meant, right? He didn't understand that. And he didn't overtly say it, but it was in Book 10 of Nicomachean Ethics, kind of chapter 7 to 9, that kind of get at this idea. But the basic idea is that he who becomes most fully human becomes most like the divine. And that there's this step after being virtuous where you're not divine, but you're kind of divine, right? And in a Christian sense, that's what or particularly Catholic sense, we would call that infused virtue, right? Supernatural virtue. And we would also talk about the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love, right? Where you're no longer operating in a virtuous sense merely from temporal things, right? But now you're also taking into account the divine things of Christianity, of faith, hope, and love. And you're taking into account, the things that you get in prayer, and you're taking into account supernatural, the desire for heaven, right? And that's not only being taken into account, but through a life of prayer, it's being infused in you, right? That is really the goal. That's really what we want.
So I'm telling you, Matthew, that's what Stoicism's all about. You got it. Because the idea when Marcus Aurelius contemplates these things, he says, yes, there's the virtuous person, and I can live. And he actually talks about living the good life. The good life is a life of virtue. The best life is when I'm connected to and infused, and there's no boundary between me and the Logos.
Well, it's interesting because if you look at the Gospel of John, right, chapter 1, he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Okay. In the Latin, it's the word logos. Right. And this is the fundamental thing about Christianity. And if even with, Judaism that eventually kind of transformed into Christianity and Catholicism, but this idea that it's not, you don't have a God and you don't have a God. It's actually, there is a God and my God is your God. And that's the reality.
And we share that, and what I think is interesting too, is that, Western, quote unquote, Western civilization, does not exist without the development of Christianity, period. Right. Christianity is the fundamental foundation and upon which Western civilization was eventually built, right? Transformed from, from the Greeks to the Romans, and then Roman became Christian. And as the Roman army spread through Europe, it profligated primarily because the only ones who could write were Christians. Right? They're the only ones who could communicate long distance, right? To create these cultures and communities. What I find interesting is the similarities at its core, like you were just talking about with, some of the Buddhist and the Taoist concepts in the East, not necessarily, though, infusing into the foundational aspects of the culture to build the structure of the society, right? Very different, and so one of the things about living in America, I think that we're challenged with is there are so many different ways of life that and so many different kinds of life that have come in. I think we really struggle. And I come by this honestly too. I think we struggle with seeing the real good in Christianity in terms of how it created the foundations of tolerance, of temperance, of community, of understanding that there are some ethics that should persist, right? That help keep a society together, that help raise kind children, right? I always thought. So you're having a new baby in July, and even though it is your third time, I guarantee you that the miracle is not going to be any less miraculous, right? It's amazing. It truly is miracle capital M when you see your child. And I always thought, right, when our two children were born, I'm like, man, like if every single child born now, faith, hope, and love in their life, and was given that and saw that and did not know bigotry or violence or harm or we'd have a completely different world in 20 years, right? If this generation of children could come in living like this, and it we just keep failing to do it, right? Yeah. We just keep failing to make that happen.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think it's not even just, the lack of violence. I think it's more than that to know what's worth fighting for. Because there is such a thing as just war, right? I'm not saying you didn't say that, but right, like I think that's the bigger problem is that we're, useless violence. Right? Unjust violence. That's the real problem, right? Because, in a Christian sense, we're in a spiritual war, right? There's, in 1 Peter it says, the enemy is prowling around like a roaring lion seeking to devour souls. Resist him solid in the faith, right? And I think especially for young men or just men in general, if you don't have anything to fight for, you're probably going to become angry and fight for no reason and kind of ruin your life, right? That's when you have men who have these anger problems. It's not because anger is bad. It's because they don't know what the heck to do with their anger and where to aim the anger.
Right.
Right. That is the thing, particularly for the masculine heart. If we don't have anything to fight for, then we don't know what to do with all the testosterone, right? We don't know what to do with all this stuff.
What do we do with all this energy? Look, I've been 15, 16. I remember what that was like. I'm like, what do I do with it? And the channeling of it, I think, is so interesting that you talk about because we, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast because I have not heard people having conversations with young men about this type of stuff, right? Where it's so easy for young men to not understand sex because they go to porn sites and they're like, I think that's what sex is. It's like, no,
it's not.
I am telling you that is not it.
I promise, right?
I promise you, right? But this inability, I think, and you mentioned it before, to hold on to something that can be foundational for them and to fight for something, even if it's internally, to be able to understand how to fight for themselves, right? To fight for doing the right thing in the right moments, because sometimes you have to fight for that. Yeah.
I mean, tell anyone who's tried to do anything worthwhile in their life, right? There's a struggle, right? There's a fight. You got to, fight, your less than ideal desires, right? When, if you're trying, like for me, and, as an example, starting a coaching business, right? Even Frank, if I'm going to be totally honest with you right now, it's, 8:56 EST right now. And before I hopped on, I was like, honey, really what I want to do is just go to the couch and just snooze and just kind of cuddle up and go to sleep, right? But when you're fighting for something, when you're aimed in a direction, and this is part of the whole idea of harmony, right? You're putting first things first and second things second. When you do that, you stop focusing on being a victim and how much you have to sacrifice, because you don't even think about it as much. It's just, that's just part of the game. That's just part of the gambit, right?
That's what I'm
I'm okay with that, because it's worth sacrificing. It's worth putting these lesser things aside. This goes back to the penitential seasons of Advent and Lent. It's worth putting the second things, the lesser things aside, so that we can better pursue the first things.
The more important things, so my eldest daughter went to Point Loma Nazarene University here in San Diego, and I was intrigued, and she just felt that calling. It was to get back to the Harry Potter thing. In San Diego, we have 4 big universities. We got SDSU, San Diego State University, UCSD, University of California, San Diego, USD, University of San Diego, a Catholic school, and Point Loma Nazarene University, which is a Nazarene in the, oh, come on, it's not Methodist. It's, I'll remember it. But I equate this to Hogwarts, of course. SDSU are the Gryffindors. Right. Anyway, PLNU is where the Hufflepuffs go. It's perfect. Which is perfect. It's perfect, right? And they're all awesome, right? And but one of the things that they talk about, and they did the introduction to the students and parents, and they said here at PLNU, we really only have, it's a very, very, very simple goal. We are going to help your student, your child, become the best versions of themselves and help them channel what they're best at naturally, so they can be of the most service to the communty.
Yeah.
That's why we exist. And I was like, mic drop. This is perfect.
Yeah.
Right?
And keep going. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
No, but the idea of it is that I was like, we had to wait for college? Really? Couldn't we have done this earlier? Like, couldn't as a society, we start doing this earlier in their lives?
Yeah. Well, and I think we need to apply that to the moral life, because, in modernity, maybe this isn't modernity in and of itself, but at least the way that it's affected, a lot of young Catholics that I know, is there's this rigid sense of morality and this emphasis on it being black and white, which again goes back to William of Ockham, and nominalism, right? And where this idea of, no, it's either good or it's bad. And so when I'm helping them with discerning something, particularly their vocation, there's this fear of, well, if I don't do the vocation that God wants for me, like that's not an okay thing. And there's this anxiousness about that. And so what I help them to realize is that, no, what God is inviting us into is to be co-creators with him, right? Co-creators. And so it's not about getting rid of my will. It's about co-creating and uniting our will with his will, because there's this harmony to it. There's this nature to it that's imbued in reality, right? Things are ordered towards something. And so, and even when it comes to temperance, right, and the virtues, it's all about ordering ourselves toward the higher goods, because when we do that, we can enjoy the lesser goods fully, because, take food, for example. If food isn't healthy for you and you're way over focused on how it tastes, you can't really enjoy it the way that a virtuous man would eat quality food with his family, and there's this completion to it because it tastes good, right?
Right.
Which one sounds better, right? Snacking on Butterfingers or a good meal with your family that tastes good?
Right. Yeah. I love that, and that also, what's interesting about how these concepts overlap, that the sense of the virtuous person and what they think about, it goes back to that intentionality. a really interesting book that I read years ago is called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Have you heard of it?
No, I can't say that I have.
It was very popular in the 60s and 70s.
Okay.
And it's by a philosophy teacher, a professor of philosophy. And he did a road trip with his son on a motorcycle. And he just, that's the book. But in it, he goes through all these philosophical concepts based on, older philosophers, of course, starting with the Aristotle and moving on up and stuff. But what he talks about these areas of virtue and of living and of how to live, and these concepts, these big themes that kind of you can hold on to in life that help guide a life. And one of them speaks to what you just talked about. He says that what we don't often talk about is quality. And what quality actually means. And I think to your point, there's a sense of virtue and quality where a virtuous moment or a virtuous action is imbued with quality in every way, right? In terms of that intentionality, and I think that as people, we can all feel it. Like we can all know and remember a meal of quality.
Yeah.
One of my
especially for the older generations before all of the fillers and crap got into our food.
Yeah, especially, right? Especially when things were homemade. One of them, we've been blessed to have some really nice, rich traditions for the holidays for our family, right? We do all the cooking and stuff like that. But when I was younger, one of my first real memories of real quality in a meal was when I visited my aunt and my uncle up in Maine. So we would drive from Pittsburgh up to Maine. And in the day, my brother and I and my cousins would go on the docks, Boothbay Harbor, and link out or inch out these little lines for crab. And then we would also fish mackerel and flounder and put them in these little igloos, filled with ice and stuff. We'd go out with my uncle into the harbor in the small little dinghy boat and pull up lobsters out of his lobster trap, right? These things were like, and he'd put them in a pot. And we then went to my aunt and uncle's house. They were in the woods. They built their own house in the woods, like crazy stuff.
Come on, that's awesome.
No, totally, right? And they had corn. She had her own garden, right? So it was in the summertime. And so we had corn that was just picked. We had fish that we just caught. We had crab that we just caught. We had lobster that we just pulled out of the ocean a couple of hours ago. And we're all there eating the food that we picked up, laughing and joking. And, you got the butter for the lobsters and everything. Quality.
Yeah.
Right. Total quality, because
human.
It was human. And also, Matthew, it was one of those moments where I felt so completely safe in every way. I felt safe physically. I felt safe emotionally. I felt safe in terms of being with people that I loved. And there was a net of emotional support that I knew was there, and a sense of being taken care of as a child. I felt safe that I could be myself. Right? I didn't have to posture or perform or anything. I could just be my natural person, as goofy as I wanted to be, and I was safe there. And that was these rare. It was unfortunately it's rare, but it was a moment of quality, and it almost felt like, yes, the Spirit was flowing through us and through me in that moment, collectively. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, yeah. And I think we all know this, right? It's a very human thing or maybe it's a less human thing, but I think most humans understand what I'm talking about. That feeling you get when you get the thing you supposedly want, and then you're still found wanting. Right? And I mean, I don't think any of your listeners are going to say, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, that's never happened to me. Right? We all know that feeling. And doesn't that tell us that there is something that permeates reality that is good? Because when we found that we know best that we don't have something when we don't have it. we know. And so, or we know what something is the most when we don't have it and we find ourselves wanting it, right? And so, and this is even Thomas Aquinas, this is one of his proofs for God's existence. The proof of, you might say, desire is that when you find yourself perpetually wanting, right? For example, you have a desire for food and there's food to satisfy that, right? Hunger, right? You have thirst and there's water to satisfy that. And so if there's a desire that we have, there is something to satisfy that desire. And so this desire for purpose and meaning, and not just the meaning of our own lives, but the meaning of creation, right? This uncontrollable, unsatiable desire for something more. He would say that there is something to satisfy that, and that would be God.
Yeah.
Right. And again, this is another thing too. There's an author that I read not a little book. I read a little bit of his good book. It's called Will and Spirit, A Contemplative Psychology. It's author is Gerald May. But he talks about two kind of mentalities. We can have a willful mentality and a willing mentality. So willfulness and willingness. So willfulness is when we try to exert our will over reality. And willingness is when we surrender to reality and then respond to reality. And there's this like dance, there's this harmony, right? Going back to that. And there's three kind of mentalities he gives for the willful mentality, right? These sub-mentalities. One of them is the coping mentality, which is life sucks, might as well have a beer. Okay.
Right.
And this, in many ways, leads to the vicious man, right? That kind of mentality leads to vice because you don't think anything is worth fighting for. There is no good.
And there's a loathing. There's a self-loathing that happens.
Yeah, exactly. And so you just content yourself with things that are less than good, i.e. what is bad, right? And you focus on that and you kind of pursue that. And then
it is funny why we do that to ourselves, right? There is some
right.
Right. We pursue the thing that we know is bad for me, but it's like we indulge in that, and then you loathe yourself even more.
Right. And the funniest thing is that God is like, get rid of that. And we're like, don't you dare tell me what to do. It's like, but you don't want it.
Right.
Like, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you what you already know, that you don't want to do this. Right. And then there's the happiness mentality. Okay. Which is more focused on my experience of the good and less on the good itself, right? I determine success by how happy I am. So seek pleasure, avoid pain. Okay. In a more altruistic sense, happiness, right? But this leads to this mentality will eventually lead to incontinence because you're focused on your experience of the good, not on the good itself.
Right.
Which means if you're experience focused, whenever there's any kind of struggle, you're going to cave and you're going to fall into the bad thing. Right. So you desire the bad, you fall into the bad, but you know that it's not good because the happiness mentality, you still have the sense of good, but you're just not there yet because you're more focused on your experience of it, right? And then there's the growth mentality, which is the most subtle of them all, similar to how continence seems like the best thing when I can will my way to goodness, right? But the growth mentality, it kind of determines success by how am I growing, right? So the growth mentality values pain and sacrifice, similar to how an athlete would value the pains of gaining muscle and whatnot, and striving and growing in that way. But the problem with the growth mentality is similar to the pitfall of the continent man. When you have this idea of it's always about growing, then you begin to lose the value of contemplation and just being. Right. And this deep contentment, right? And Thomas Aquinas will even say that the virtue of temperance, the secondary nature of it is serenity of the spirit. This deep contentment where I'm not grasping and I'm not trying to strive. Not that I'm not trying to grow, because the growth is great, right? But that's not the primary thing, right? And so that leads to continence. Yeah.
Right.
And that leads to continence. Keep going.
No, well, I love this concept because everyone says, well, you always got to be growing. Always. It's like, well, but there's a way to grow, like you talked about, where it's the willingness versus the willfulness. Yeah. Because the world is meant to grow. I just did a hike this morning in Mission Trails near my house with my son-in-law, which is awesome. And green shoots over branches that were barren just a week ago because we had some good rain.
Mm-hmm.
It's designed to grow. The
Mm-hmm.
world is designed to grow, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are all as people naturally tuned to growth. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe to your point is you don't have to force growth and grasp it, but that if you can contemplate and be a part of it, it's going to happen naturally and might
Mm-hmm.
even happen in a better way, in a stronger
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Well, and even look at the plants, right? They're growing, but they're very peaceful about it, right?
It's
I know it's
subtle.
kind of a funny image, but like imagine
Yeah.
imagine a tree just kind of like, with arms and like an estranged face, like crawling out of the ground, like, get me out of here, right? Like that's just so, I mean, obviously it's, weird because I'm trying to make it into a human, character traits, but that idea of like a tree grasping for growth, it's like, well, no, it just is,
Right. Just
right?
will.
It just is, right? Okay. So then the growth, but and then this is the problem with the continent man. Okay, that's
Mhm.
better than being incontinent, but the pitfall of the continent man is that it's easier for him to think that he doesn't need God because hey, I'm
Right.
doing the good stuff, like I'm content. It's like it's this contentment in the sense of I don't really desire much. I'm just kind of subduing my desires so I can do the good thing, right? And when you suppress one desire, you tend to suppress all the desires. And this is very similar with emotions, right? So people who are struggling with, trauma or anxiety, right? A tendency might to be to suppress that emotion, but the problem is that you then suppress all emotion, right? You suppress your capacity for deeper happiness when you suppress your ability to experience deep sadness or anger, right? Whenever you suppress one emotion, you suppress all of the emotions,
Sure.
right? They all kind of become, a shadow of what they could have been. And then leaving the willful mentalities and you enter into the willing mentality, that is what leads to virtue because there's this deep contentment, right? There's this acceptance. And really the natural, particularly for Christians, recognizing God, what flows from contentment is a deep gratitude.
Yes.
Right? You can't be grateful if you don't believe in a giver. Right? And this is where the continent man needs to grow and needs to make sure of is this sense of gratitude. Because if we don't have gratitude, if we don't see things as a gift, we very quickly forget the giver because we don't see the gift.
Yeah, I love
right?
that.
And so that is the real goal is to enter into the dance with reality, right? And even going back to how Christianity is the building blocks for Western culture, we wouldn't have the idea that humility is a good thing without Christianity, right? Prior to Christianity, pride was considered a virtue.
Sure. Well,
right?
and the Romans especially were anything but humble. In fact, humility was the worst thing that they could be.
Yeah, it was weakness.
As it was weakness, and they were conquerors. From the Buddhist perspective, there's a deep humility in terms of understanding, and the Taoist perspective is very much about a deep humility, recognizing where you are. But again, it never translated into a social construct. The one thing that's so interesting about the Christian perspective of joy, love, and hope and humility is that it allows society to say, okay, you owe a sense of caretakingness to one another, right? To that community. And that's the goodness that, but what I love that distinction that you talk about with the continent man not yet being fully open to the real growth that can happen when you are humble enough to engage with the co-creator of your life.
And to be content.
Right?
Not complacent, right? But content. And this is another funny thing too. So the cardinal virtues, right? Cardinal comes from the Latin word, which means hinge, right? So this is the idea that all virtue hinges on these four things, right? The cardinal virtues. So you have prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude. Okay.
Yep.
So what really blew my mind was when I realized why there are four cardinal virtues. Do you know why there are four cardinal virtues?
Tell me true.
Okay, this blew my mind, and I was like, "Whoa, this is so cool!" So, when Plato was writing I think Plato, maybe Socrates, one of them, was writing the Republic. He, trying to figure out what is a good society, and then from that, what's a good citizen. And so he's trying to, compartmentalize and construe what are the parts of a good citizen. And so we have different 4 areas or 3 areas really of the human being. Okay. We have our thoughts, we have our actions and interactions, and we have our feelings, which can be broken down to our desires and our fears. Okay. So those are 4 things right there. Okay. So how do we think well? Prudence.
Right.
How do we act and interact well? Justice. How do we fear well? Fortitude. How do we desire well? Temperance.
Sure. And what's interesting about what you just said and where you have to read Marcus Aurelius is exactly what he talks about in terms of the pillars of Stoicism. It's the same. It's the same stuff.
And that's because they came from the same group of the idea of the cardinal virtues and living the good life. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I don't know, Matthew. That's the immutable part of it, right? It's 2,000 plus years old. It's 5,000 years old. Is whatever that is, right? What that we recognize that, and I think that with conversations like this, we can help think about this every day, because it's the everyday, and like you talk about, we especially men need something to fight for. Well, isn't that worth fighting for in your own life every day?
Yeah.
The sense of getting to a place of contentment. I mean, that's, it doesn't, you don't do it by not fighting for it or thinking about it, right? You have to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. And to give some like examples, so my coaching, I often use virtue as a framework. I do other stuff too, like communication muscles, other things that are kind of extraneous, but related. But it's crazy so prudence, a sub virtue of prudence is alertness, which is to be fully aware of the situation. Okay. So a strategy that in growing in that virtue is I call it distracting from the distraction. So this is for people who struggle with intrusive thoughts, temptations, like sexual temptations for a lot of guys, where it's this thought comes in, and then it engages the fear, this fight or flight response, and you're like, right. So what happens with anxiety is you get tunnel vision, and it puts you into a binary where I either fight or I flee, right? And in modernity, we've come to realize there's the freeze and the fawn response, but either way, there's this kind of dichotomy of fight or flight. And so what it does is it prevents any form of creativity, because creativity is based on the idea that you have, in a certain sense, limitless options, right? I could do it this or this way or this way or this combination or that combination, right? But with anxiety, it's this or this, right? And you get this tunnel vision, right? And you hyperfixate on it. And so when we grow in the virtue of alertness, when we become more fully aware of the situation, we kind of open up our eyes and realize, oh, wait a minute. This isn't a fight or flight. That was just a leaf blowing in the wind. That wasn't a saber tooth.
Right.
Right. And so distracting from the distraction is basically treating that thought like every other thought you've had during the day. Right. Chris, how many thoughts have you had today?
2,467,000,000,
Right. Exactly.
22.
And how many of them do you remember?
About 5.
About 5. Right. Exactly. So what would it look like for people who struggle with that intrusive thought or the anxiousness, right? What would it look like if you treated that thought like all of the other thoughts that you had during the day?
Just goes
That's
through.
The goal, right?
Yeah.
Because when you become fully aware of the situation, you're like, oh, wait a minute. This isn't something I need to really focus on. And so a question that I give my clients is pause and say, wait a minute, is this worth my time and energy? If not, what is?
Right.
If it is, okay, how should I do it? Right?
And if it's not, redirect towards something that's more positive and
exactly.
forward thinking.
And not even necessarily, super productive necessarily, but even just distracting from the distraction, right? All of your thoughts throughout the day. Why do you forget them? Because there was no emotional response. Your body and your brain didn't think it was important enough. And so your thought train just kept going, right? So you can think of it, for guys in particular, guys who are struggling with, pornography, masturbation. What I'll say is there's a beautiful woman in a red dress. Okay. You can think about the beautiful woman, and we all know where that goes. Or you could think about the red dress. Hey, okay, red dress. What else is red? Well, an apple is red. Kind of reminds me of pears. I'm thinking about oranges. Orange and blue is an interesting color combination. Blue reminds me of the University of Michigan. Mason Gold. I'm not a Michigan fan. I'm a Michigan State fan. The Lions are playing. Oh, when are the Lions playing?
Right.
You just keep it rolling.
Right.
Because it's just simply not worth your time and energy. And that is one of the, particularly when it comes to spiritual warfare, that is one of the pitfalls that the enemy gets us in. Is he tries to get us to engage with these things with the false assumption that it's worth our time and energy in the first place, right? He tries to make himself come across as this massively jacked dude, when in reality, he's this 3-year-old girl, okay? 3-year-old girl throws punches at me. I'm probably not even going to feel it, and I'm going to ignore it, right? Massive jack dude starts throwing fists, and I can't run away. You better believe I'm going to fight, right? Sure. It's all a smokescreen in that regard. Mm-hmm. And so this is one of the tactics is he tries to get us to just waste all of our energy, and particularly when we're in the midst of incontinence and continence, if we waste all of our willpower and energy, then we fall to the bad thing.
Of course, because that's so much easier.
Exactly, right? And so he doesn't need us to desire the sin. He just needs us to be too weak to refuse it.
Right.
Exactly.
I think you're probably an exceptional coach, Matthew. I think that is marvelous that you've chosen a vocation like this. You are extraordinarily well learned and well read, which I really appreciate. And I think that, at the very beginning of our conversation, you talked about this really interesting Venn diagram overlap between what maybe a spiritual guidance someone might get from a Catholic perspective versus a quote unquote life coach versus a mentor. And you fit in that Venn diagram really well. I
do my best. Yeah.
I think it's terrific. So this has been an outstanding conversation, and I'd love to do this again with
Absolutely,
you.
Chris. It's been very enjoyable.
Oh, I think it's been marvelous. And what I really want to talk about next time is, as you start approaching your third child, is I'd love to talk to you as your thoughts about fatherhood and sonhood and what that looks like, especially when you move back to Michigan and are back into the fold of your original family. I think that would be a really interesting conversation.
Yeah. And sneak peek for that, our first 2 births, we did home births.
Oh, wow.
So I actually delivered my firstborn daughter.
Oh, those are episodes all in and of themselves. That is fantastic.
Yeah, that's a teaser for the next one.
That's a teaser for the next one. Well, all right. Well, before I let you go, I do have one final question for you. Who is someone that you know that I don't know that I should know?
I would say, do they have to be living?
No.
Okay. I would say St. Francis de Sales. Okay. So
wonderful. St. Francis. How do you spell de Sales?
Desales. So it's 2 words. So he's from Sales, right? So he would be in the 1500s, I believe. He was Catholic, obviously, but he was a gentleman. Okay. So he knew how to fence, ride a horse. He knew rhetoric, all that kind of stuff, right? His dad was very wealthy. And long story short, he became a priest. He became a bishop, and he actually brought over 10,000 Calvinists back to the Catholic Church. And he did that in the context of the Catholic Church, in that era was very militant.
Right.
And his approach was, we're never going to, similar to you win more bees with honey than vinegar. He said, our desire is to win souls, not to conquer them. And so if we do that, we must preach the gospel with firmness, but rather than with military strength, rather we must do it with the strength of the sacrificial lamb of Christ.
Right. Of the word, right? The strength of the word and the strength of the devotion.
Yeah. And the great book that he wrote is Introduction to the Devout Life. That is the basis of my spiritual life. It's a wealth of knowledge. Very, very good.
It's called Introduction to the Devout Life. I just pulled him up on Google. Outstanding. I will absolutely read that book. I'll read that book, and you can read Marcus Aurelius.
I'll do my best. I'm not the best at doing all that kind of stuff, but I will do my best at reading it.
Yeah, it's an easy read in terms of the words.
Okay,
but it's a good read in terms of really thinking about what he talks about.
Sounds good.
Well, Matthew, you've been a delight, and I can't wait to talk with you again. And I wish to all the blessings of the holiday season for you and your family.
Thank you. You as well, Chris, and to everyone else.
Take care. Bye-bye.
God bless. Bye.
Oh, yes. Come on, Matthew. Goodness gracious. Man, what a fantastic man. What a fantastic young man. He is wise and mature beyond his years. He doesn't talk like a 26-year-old, I'll tell you that. He doesn't think like one either. His insights are more of someone much older. He's been around. He's paying attention. He reads. What I really loved about this conversation was how learned Matthew was, especially with the classics, with Thomas Aquinas, with St. John de la Salle, whom I have to read up on. And I love this overlay between his Catholic structures of virtue and thinking about virtue and some of the overlays like we talked about with some of the Stoics and even the Tao Te Ching and the like. And so what have I learned from Matthew? I learned that I really want to think more deeply about willfulness versus willingness. I want to think about my dance with reality. I want to think about how I can channel the muse, whether it's Jesu Christ, whether it's Odin, whether it's Gaia, whether it's Zeus, whether it's the Lord, whether it's Allah, doesn't matter. It matters to some people. But I think most importantly, what matters is what matters to you. How can you channel the great unknown to have it flow through you? How can you pay attention to be willing, not willful, in building a virtuous life and getting to a place of contentment? Because isn't that what we want in the end? To be content and happy? Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Visit menfolkjourneys.com. I'd love to have a chat with you too. Thank you so much for listening. Word bid Philared.